Good evening. My name's Joe Sam Robinson, and it's my pleasure to welcome tonight Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck.
Hello, hello.
You're a gentleman that needs no introduction. I think many people in this part of the world, indeed in faraway places, have heard your name and respect your high intellectual abilities. Now, you can give me a compliment after that. No, go ahead. All right, you can hit the ball back. Well,
I'm supposed to compliment you?
No.
Oh,
I wasn't asking for a compliment. No. I was
fishing there.
If you threw one out, I would accept it. Well, let's.
I would say you're the foremost neurosurgeon in the state.
Oh, great.
So,
that's good. I'll bring a little business in.
Yes,
Great.
I understand that you are for credit for getting our rooftop helicopter at the medical center.
Yes, I played a role in that.
Yes,
I think
that in itself.
The money was disgorged
Yes.
by the government, the state
I'm
government.
sure you've done many other things like that. That's
Well,
just
thank
one
you.
I knew off the top of my head.
All right.
So.
Well, thank you. All right. So you floated my boat a bit. Maybe we can move on and discuss some of the way the world is these days. And we're a long way from the ocean. We're on mostly dry land here, though occasionally we have floods. 70% of the earth is ocean. It's a great unexplored part of our geosystem, and we don't pay enough attention to it. We have climatic change. Is the ocean getting colder, getting warmer? Is it getting polluted, or is it getting overfished? And indeed, have humans tread there, so to speak, or swam there would be a better word. And I'm told that scuba divers, sort of like sea hunt, they go down and fight octopi and great giant squids and fish up pearls and sunken treasure. And you're part of that shall we say group that does that. So I just throw you the football here. What are the oceans like these days? Do you have any comments about what you observe, climatic point of view?
Yeah, they're a mess, I will say. I'm a recreational scuba instructor.
Now, earlier I blundered into using the wrong word. I always thought of it as skin diving, but no, that's absolutely a verboten word. And why don't we call it skin diving?
Well, it's not verboten. It's just old-fashioned. The ability to go underwater, deep diving, is not much more than a century old, maybe a century and a half tops, with the old-style brass helmets and surface-supplied air. I think skin diving developed, I guess, in the mid-20th century to kind of distinguish that between people who just went down in their skins rather than with any sort of supply.
So it hasn't been around. I know we had the old, I don't know, the earlier 1930s movies with someone down there with a diving bell on. And I think, if watching television, they still do that in Alaska when they're down searching for gold. Is that?
Yes, although the equipment is, of course, far more modern and
I wonder why they do that. Why they don't just have people with tanks going down.
That's what's called saturation diving. If you're going to be down there for a very long period, I get ahead of myself, but if you've got your own supply of air or breathing mix, it doesn't last that long. And the deeper you are, the longer you have to decompress. And so just time-wise, it's very inefficient. You spend most of your time, rather than being on the bottom doing whatever it is you want to do, you spend most of your time having to come up to get more air.
I see.
And just doing what are called decompression hangs. So right now I'm reading a book about diving on the Andrea Doria, the very famous ship that sank in 1956. Which is in something like 250 feet of water. And for 20 minutes of being able to swim around on or in that wreck, you have to spend something like an hour to an hour and a half doing decompression, just coming up.
Now you could have a little, shall we say, house at the bottom of the ocean. You could swim down to your house and sort of hang there, and then it would be more efficient.
Yes, and that is what's called saturation diving. So you just stay down there for several days on end. You have a food supply. You could even have food and water delivered to you. But whenever the job is done, if you're building a pipeline or doing maintenance work on an oil rig or something, when the job is done in 5 days, 10 days, or whatever, then the entire unit is raised and kept under pressure, and then everybody does their decompression all at once over a period of hours or days.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Well, now, I know you're a certified diving instructor,
Yes.
and suppose I came to you and said, well, I haven't really done this before, but it seems intriguing. Would you ask me to lift weights, swim for 5 miles, or what would you say to a neophyte?
Well, that's
who falls under your purview?
Well, that's what you would have done 50 or certainly 70 years ago. The open circuit scuba unit that you see people swimming around with the tanks on their backs was actually developed by a very famous name, Jacques Cousteau.
He did that?
Yeah, during
really?
World War II, 1943.
Well, tell me the story about that. That's a good story.
Yeah, he was a French Navy diver. And
really?
The only self-contained system you had up to that point was what was called rebreather. You'd breathe out your CO2, it would get scrubbed, and then you'd breathe in air that had been scrubbed of CO2. But that had severe limitations. And so Cousteau and a friend of his, Gagnon, I believe, developed the Aqualung, the demand regulator. And so in the latter stages of World War II and for the next 10 years, it was a military science. And then people started doing it for fun. They came out of the military, they just started doing it for fun, for sightseeing, if you will. And then as other people got interested in it and they went to these people to learn how, well, they had learned in the military and they were trained up to military spec. So if you had taken scuba diving from, for instance, Sonny Wiltshire, who was an institution in Macon for many years in, say, 1970 or
yes.
even 1980.
Back when I was just a pup back in those days. Yes.
You would have probably spent 10 weeks doing nothing but theory and swimming and getting in shape
yes.
Before they even let you go into the bottom of the pool.
Yes.
Well, we've progressed beyond that now, and maybe the pendulum has swung a bit too far in the other direction. We now feed it to the student in bite-sized chunks. So
yes.
for your basic open water certification, which is almost a learner's permit, not quite, because you have the ability to dive unsupervised when you get it, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. Basically, you need to be in fair to good health, and you need to be able to swim.
Yes.
And that's really all the qualification that you need.
Now, I will say this. My family, we were in the Caribbean, and with my sons, well, let's go skin diving, or wrong word, scuba diving. And so, sure, there's a little boat going out, and almost no instruction, literally,
yes.
if I can remember, almost none. Here it is, breathe in, breathe out, good luck to you, and I'll be there right with you. And we might go down as deep as 20 feet.
Yes.
Now, is that dangerous, or as I lived through that, except
it's dangerous. Yes.
Is it?
But I will say that sounds like what's called a Discover Scuba class.
Yes.
When you are given the basics and you dive very closely supervised with an instructor.
Yes.
And it's designed to literally, as well as metaphorically, get your feet wet and
yes.
decide if you
yes.
like it. But yes, Boyle's law essentially says
yes.
Boyle's law, twice the pressure, half the volume.
Yes.
So and I believe your brother's a pulmonologist, and even
yes.
though you're not a pulmonologist,
No.
I'm sure you got.
My father was a lung surgeon.
Oh,
so
okay. I did not know that. Very good.
Yeah.
So, well, your lungs have no pain receptors, and they can only expand so much. So if you swim down several feet, and the pressure increases tremendously in those several feet.
Right.
And take a good deep breath to maximize the volume you've got in your lungs. Hold your breath and then come up.
You'll pop your lungs.
4 or 5 feet. You'll
Pop.
blow your lungs. Yeah, or you'll have an arterial gas embolism.
Something bad will happen.
Or pneumothorax.
I don't think that was
yeah.
explained that well to us. We jumped in the water.
Well, you can alleviate or greatly reduce those dangers just by never holding your breath.
That's right.
Yeah,
breathe
never,
in and
never.
breathe out. I think that's what we heard, right?
But yeah, Boyle's law is important because as we sit here, we are sitting at the bottom of the ocean, but it is an ocean of air, an ocean of gas, and a square inch, about so big, from here to the working top of the atmosphere, we'll say 100,000 feet, that's 15 pounds of air.
Yes.
So you've got 15 pounds of air pushing down on every, so you don't feel it, you're acclimated.
Right.
Water is so much heavier that to double that, to add another 15 pounds, you only have to go down 33 feet.
Yes.
And so, and then when you go to 66 feet, you've tripled it. So.
It's getting pretty dangerous. So is there some kind of Rubicon that you cross when you're scuba diving? That really be careful here? Is there, or just,
not really,
it's relative.
Because
every few feet it has its
yes,
dangers attached.
Because if you think about it, the percentage change in pressure is greatest just below the surface. So
yes.
Go down 5 feet, breathe in compressed air, hold your breath, and come to the surface, and that's enough.
Really?
So
wow.
yes. And now once again, speaking as an instructor and also as a lawyer, you know, we are told never ever tell somebody that scuba diving is safe. It's an extreme sport. But the risks can be managed.
Yes.
They can't be eliminated. But they can be managed. And one of them is you greatly reduce the inherent risks just by following the basic rules.
Yes.
Will they guarantee your safety? No. Will they greatly reduce the risks? Absolutely.
Now, we've had discussions about the different risk of your sport, and cave diving is up there.
Yes.
Do you have any, for our listeners, anyone that might be tempted into cave diving, want to describe? Should you have a little piece of string with you to follow out of the cave?
Oh yes, you have reels, you have lines. The lines are color coded. They have pointers on them. I myself am not a cave diver because it's a bit of a daredevil sport. A hugely disproportionate number of scuba diving deaths are deaths by cave diving.
I mentioned many years ago, one of my friends, a young boy, nice guy, 22 years old or so. I knew him in the National Guard, and it was his sport, and he died in Florida, I think, in a cave there. Is that a big...
Florida is probably the cave diving capital of the world. The springs, the warm weather. And you would not be learning that in your introductory course.
No.
Your open water course, your first intro course, it's what it sounds like. You're an open water diver, and that means you cannot dive in an overhead environment. You have to be able to ascend straight up to the surface at any time. You cannot go into decompression. You cannot load so much nitrogen into your blood gases that you have to make a decompression stop.
Right.
So those are the two big limitations. You're limited to about 60 feet. You can't stay down too long, and you can't go into an overhead environment. But cave diving, cavern diving, yes, the danger factor there, that it's a very advanced type of diving, and it takes special equipment, it takes special training, and it is, as I say, a hugely disproportionate number of scuba diving deaths come with the cave diving community.
Now, it's interesting that war often brings forth advances of one sort or another. In World War II, it's interesting, maybe we can explore that slightly, about the French Navy. Now, Crusoe was in the Free French Navy. He wasn't fighting with the
I believe
Nazis.
He was Free French, yes.
Okay, great. I know the Italians had frog men, as they call them.
Yes.
They would go in and successfully blow up British ships in the Mediterranean.
And we did too. We had.
How did we do? How did that work exactly?
Well, our frogmen were called UDT, Underwater Demolitions Technicians.
Yes.
And before Cousteau developed the demand regulator and the open circuit SCUBA, and I should say SCUBA is an acronym, self-contained underwater breathing apparatus.
Yes.
So you're not being supplied from the surface, you're carrying it on your back. They would use these very dangerous carbon dioxide scrubbing rebreathers, which were equally dangerous in an entirely different way, because if the scrubbing stopped, you'd be breathing in CO2
and that would go out pretty fast.
Yes. But they would, in the Pacific, for instance, their job would be, a lot of them would be Navy or Marines. They would swim in, they would blow the coral reefs or put explosives on the coral reefs, so that our Higgins boats could then go through and hit the beach. And the UDT ultimately developed into an elite, well, they were elite themselves, but they developed into what today is one of the most elite services in the entire U.S. military, the SEALs.
Yes.
That's how they got their start.
And, well, that's interesting. Now, I see people going exploring wrecks underwater, and maybe they used to go down with humans would do it with scuba tanks. And now I think they just use cameras. They go down, explore wrecks that way. Any comments?
Well, yes. The deepest that I have ever heard anyone going down, and I'm not sure here, it was either 700 feet or 1,000 feet. And this is the most extreme of the extreme. I think there's a place called Bushman's Hole in South Africa that is, it pushes 1,000 feet deep.
Yes.
And it's a daredevil thing. You go down and touch the bottom for 30 seconds, and then you have to spend several hours,
yes.
Like 10 to 12 hours decompressing on the
right.
surface. That,
right.
The really functional limit is down to around 3 to 400 feet.
Right.
And beyond that, you have to have some sort of pressure vessel. Our tack subs, our boomers can go, obviously, it's classified, but I'd say well over 1,000 feet. If you want to investigate, for instance, the Challenger Deep at 20-odd thousand feet, if you want to investigate the Titanic, which is 2.5 miles down, you either have to go down in a pressure vessel or you send down an ROV, remote observation.
Well, presumably,
vessel.
there's a lot of mineral wealth buried in the oceans. I mean, does anyone take any efforts to do that, get some of it out? Or?
Well, a huge proportion of our petroleum products now are from offshore rigs. The Gulf Coast is a big area. The North Sea is a big area. Mining rights. I don't know that there's a lot of undersea mining going on, but of course
presumably there'd be a lot of stuff.
Oh yes, and the international law, the Sea Convention, which was negotiated back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, does address mining, commercial mining rights in international waters, the continental shelf. And the sea itself actually contains a not inconsiderable amount of dissolved gold. Now refining that gold, getting it out, would be technically very difficult. But yeah, the sea is a massive resource.
And also, salt can be removed. It can be fresh water for a thirsty planet. I mean,
yes. Of course, fishing is a major concern right now. Fishing is the only large-scale commercial activity that humans engage in anymore, in which we hunt our food, and we are destroying the ecosystem because the human population is so great and the demand for seafood is so high that we're getting the balance really badly out of whack.
Well, should the sea be farmed? I mean, presumably there are resources that could be extracted. Food could be extracted. Plankton, I guess you could do something. And also, could you just have a little part of the continental shelf? You sort of wall it off and start to raise mackerel there. I mean,
yes.
Is that anyone attempt to do that?
Well, I think it's probably more economically efficient. Just have a mackerel farm. Farmed salmon or this sort of thing. But there's still a lot of open water harvesting done, and it just comes down to the population's too big. We are throwing too much too fast at Mother Nature, and the oceans, they provide oxygen, they provide heat sink, and there's only so much they can take, and their temperature is going up, their acidity is going up. This is wrecking the coral reefs.
Can you see that if you've done that? Yeah. I noticed that when I hike in the Rockies, the glaciers that were there from a few decades ago are vanishing.
Yes.
Do you have a similar feeling?
Very much so. Elkhorn coral, which is, the name is very descriptive. Very big pieces of coral. They've shattered, they've fallen, and it looks like you're swimming over a football field full of bones.
Wow.
And this is just done by the by global warming, by increasing acidification of the oceans, and by divers who are inconsiderate. But they're a relative. Divers who are inconsiderate really chap my hide, but they're a small part of the overall problem.
You know, a problem with doctors often is they take up dangerous hobbies, including flying airplanes.
Yes.
And if you're going to fly an airplane, well, you really have to pay a lot of attention. That's a big, serious thing to do. You can't be doing it cavalierly. It's the same for scuba diving.
Yes.
I mean, do you feel like I haven't done it in a while. I think I should be pretty restrained about what I do, or to use a phrase, get your sea legs back a little bit.
Very much so.
Any comments about that, about
Yes.
how frequently you need to do this?
Yeah, and the scuba diving community is self-regulating, and it does this in order to avoid government regulation. And so it has an incentive to regulate itself well, but it's also a for-profit business. So are there operators out there somewhere who may look the other way, who may be lax with their safety standards? Probably so. The general rule is if you have not dived in a couple of years, you really ought to take a refresher course.
Yes.
And that's an important thing to do. Another concern is, although scuba is an extreme sport, a lot of people don't do it for the adrenaline, they do it for the relaxation. And I'm that. I go down, I breathe slowly, I look at the pretty fish. I can't be reached by cell phone. It's like going back to the womb, you just float. But even those divers, even the ones who are not the adrenaline junkies, you do this at vacation locations. You do it while you're on vacation, and the odds are you drank a lot the night before.
No, that's always, is that bad?
It's very bad. You're hungover, you're dehydrated, you're impaired judgment, and you make mistakes. And,
Yes.
and that is when that's when the dangers of scuba can really assert themselves if you are cavalier about this stuff.
Yes.
So.
Do you have any particular places you like to dive, favorite locations? Or
My personal favorites, I'm not a huge, big world traveler. I like the Caribbean. There's great diving in the Caribbean,
Yes.
and with Atlanta right, an hour away, it's easy to get to. I really like the Caymans, stable government, English speaking, friendly, good economy, and wonderful dive locations of many different types. The Bahamas are good. The U.S. Virgin Islands, the British Virgin Islands are good. And depending on what you're after, if you go to Cozumel, you do what's called drift diving. They throw you off the back of the boat, and the current takes you. You don't even really have to swim much, and the boat essentially follows you. And then when you reach your air limitations, you come up and get back on the boat. On the other hand, if you go to Bonaire, which is darn close to South America.
Yeah,
you rent a truck, you rent some tanks, you just drive around the coast road, and when you see a spot that looks good, you just stop your truck, walk in from the shore, and swim to your heart's content.
Wow. Well,
So, worldwide, the Red Sea is an excellent spot, excellent destination spot. The Pacific, as an historian, I'd love to dive Chuuk Lagoon, which was a big Japanese naval base, and they scuttled a huge fleet there.
Yes, a lot of wrecks there.
So and it's very
we
much.
helped scuttle it, I think.
Yes.
We assisted in the process.
Yes, but it's a national park now, so it's very well maintained. You can see fascinating things there. So
How about the Great Barrier Reef?
It's in trouble. It'd be a great place to dive, but it's showing the signs of climate change. But it would be another, even in its current state, it'd be a great place to dive.
If you go into really Arctic waters, is there a special, obviously, wetsuit? I mean, but is that, and there wouldn't be much coral there, I wouldn't think.
No, but ice diving. I hear that seeing the underside of an ice field is just a breathtaking experience. But yes, that requires very specialized training. It requires specialized equipment. If you're going to be in water colder than around 60 degrees, because water being so dense, it takes the heat out of you at extreme speed.
Yes.
You need what's called a dry suit, and a dry suit is going to add a level of complexity to. Not
a wetsuit, a dry suit.
Yeah, wetsuits. I personally view a dive with a wetsuit as a failed dive. If you're over around 80 degrees, sometimes you can do it without a wetsuit. Below around 80, you definitely need a wetsuit. Below around 65 degrees or so, you definitely need a dry suit. And
Really?
dry suits are complex.
Well,
so.
80 degrees, I mean, there's a lot of water that's colder than 80 degrees.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, but I would imagine most of the ocean, I could be wrong.
Well, in the tropics, and
yes.
that's the type of diving I do.
Yes.
For instance, we do our checkout dives in the Florida Springs, and many of those have a constant year-round temperature of 72.
Yes.
That is a definite wetsuit.
Really?
That's a definite wetsuit category. That's cool.
Now you take your students, your neophytes, to the Blue
Grotto, which is in Williston, Florida. It's about 30 minutes south of Gainesville. That's where the dive shop with which I'm affiliated goes to. So, for the open water certification, you would do online computer learning, and then you would spend some time with me, about a weekend in the pool, learning hands-on skills.
Right.
And then we would go for a weekend on our checkout dives, when you would demonstrate those skills in an actual open water environment.
Yes. Well, the bends, what happens if you get the bends? Comments on that?
Well, yes.
Have you seen it in comments?
Decompression injury, and it's sort of that's another sort of old-fashioned phrase, because it covers
skin diving.
Yeah, it covers a whole lot of decompression injury. You come up too fast, the nitrogen that is dissolved into solution in your blood stays in your blood and starts to bubble. You feel it most heavily in your joints.
Yes.
This is where the bends come from, but that may not be the most dangerous part.
It could be your brain,
lungs, brain. So once again, we get to pneumothorax, arterial gas embolism. There are a lot of ways that over-fast decompression can really mess you up.
Do you ever tell your students, you just don't seem to have the emotional restraint to do this? Do you ever warn your students that that's just not for you?
I've never had somebody that I've told that emotionally. I've had younger divers that it's been perfectly clear to me that they don't have the maturity yet, but happily they themselves have picked up on it. I have had one or two divers who can't even swim well enough.
Really?
The first thing you're going to...
You have to swim to do this, that helps.
A lot of people think, well, I've got air, why do I need to swim? But one of the things you have to do is to be able to swim 200 yards with an unassisted swim. And that's essentially 10 laps around the pool that I train in.
Yes.
I've had people who cannot even make one lap. And luckily, they know immediately. So
yes.
I have very rarely had to say, no, you're not up to this, because normally they figure it out themselves.
Do people take, physicals before they do this?
Yes, you are. For any training course, you're required to take a physical. There's a wonderful handout sheet that instructs the physician what the physician should look for. And there's a wonderful outfit up that's affiliated with Duke, with my alma mater, the Divers Assistance Network. And they actually have on-call physicians who many of them are themselves scuba divers, and they are trained in diving physiology. So at any time, a physician can call them up, either saying, look, I've got somebody here.
Yes.
He wants his certification, what do I need to look for? Or if somebody comes up with a diving injury, you can call them on the dive boat and say, look, somebody just blew off his safety stop, he came up too fast, these are his symptoms. What do you think? So it's a really great service to have. So.
Well, okay, in the remaining 30 seconds we have, why don't you say what diving means to you, what you've extracted from your experience?
Connection back to the natural world, breaking free of this artificial, industrialized world that we've got, relaxing, getting in touch with nature and with yourself.
Okay, on that, all right. Thank you once again, Buck.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Indeed.
Good. We'll talk some more.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves. Endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.